You're fired, effective immediately. The CEO's cold voice cut through the hangar like a blade. She slid the termination papers across the oil-stained workbench toward the mechanic in grease-covered coveralls. Daniel Cross pulled off his work gloves slowly, nodded once, and said nothing. He turned his back and walked toward the exit, carrying a small cardboard box of personal items. A little girl ran to him, wrapping her arms tight around his legs. "Daddy, are we moving again?" Before Daniel could answer, the ground began to shake violently. A Navy helicopter descended low, its loudspeaker booming. "Petty Officer Daniel Cross, report immediately." The CEO spun around and froze completely. Daniel Cross was 39 years old, a single father and a maintenance mechanic at a private airport that serviced corporate jets and small charter flights. He worked the night shift so he could drop his daughter Lily off at school every morning and pick her up every afternoon. Sleep came in fragments. Coffee kept him upright, and his daughter's smile made it all worth it. Most people at the hangar saw Daniel as just another grease monkey, quiet, competent, never caused trouble. He took the hardest jobs, the messiest repairs, the emergency calls that came at 3 a.m. when a hydraulic line burst or an engine refused to turn over. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for raises. He showed up, did the work, and went home to an 8-year-old girl who needed dinner, homework help, and bedtime stories. What they didn't know was that Daniel had once served in the United States Navy as an aviation rescue technician. He had dangled from helicopters over stormy seas, pulled drowning pilots from sinking aircraft, worked on complex mechanical systems while his life hung by a cable. He had been decorated twice for valor, but he left the service after a mission went wrong, after he watched a crew chief die because a piece of equipment failed. A failure Daniel had warned about but been overruled on. The guilt ate at him. The nightmares wouldn't stop. So he walked away, took his discharge, and tried to build a quiet life for his daughter. Lily was everything to him. Her mother had left when Lily was 2, unable to handle the instability of military life and Daniel's long deployments. So it was just the two of them now. Lily had grown up with the smell of hydraulic fluid and engine oil, doing her homework at a corner workbench in the hangar while her father finished late shifts. She never complained. She trusted him completely. Daniel had made her a promise. No more chaos, no more fear, just a stable, quiet life. The CEO of the airport, Margaret Hale, was a different breed entirely. She had inherited the facility from her father and ran it like a corporation, not a service. Image mattered. Shareholder confidence mattered. Safety reports that might scare investors did not matter. Margaret was polished, sharp-tongued, and she viewed the mechanics as replaceable parts in her operation. Daniel had tried to warn her 3 weeks ago. He had found a recurring issue with a batch of replacement hydraulic actuators that the airport had purchased from a discount supplier. The parts looked fine on paper, but Daniel had seen hairline fractures in the metal housings, fractures that could lead to catastrophic failure mid-flight. He had written a detailed report and submitted it directly to Margaret's office. She never responded. When he followed up in person, she dismissed him with a wave of her hand. "We have contracts, Daniel. We have budgets. If there were a real problem, the manufacturer would have issued a recall. I'm not going to ground our fleet and lose revenue because you have a hunch." He tried once more. "Ma'am, this isn't a hunch. I've seen this kind of failure before. If one of those actuators goes during flight..." "Enough," her voice was ice. "I'll take it under advisement. You're dismissed." But she didn't take it under advisement. She buried the report. 2 weeks later, a minor investor raised concerns about operational costs. Margaret needed a scapegoat, someone to blame for budget overruns and delayed maintenance schedules. She chose Daniel. He was quiet. He wouldn't fight back. And firing someone publicly would send a message to the rest of the staff. Stay in line. So on a cold Tuesday afternoon with half the hangar crew watching, Margaret Hale walked up to Daniel Cross, handed him termination papers, and said the words that would change everything. "You're fired, effective immediately." Daniel looked at the papers. He looked at Lily, sitting 20 feet away with her school books spread out on a bench. He thought about the promise he had made to her. He pulled off his gloves, took the papers, and said nothing. Because sometimes silence is the only dignity you have left. The hangar fell into an uncomfortable silence. A few of the younger mechanics exchanged glances. One of them, a cocky kid named Travis who had been at the airport for less than a year, smirked and muttered something under his breath. Another laughed. Daniel heard it, so did Lily. Margaret turned on her heel, satisfied that the matter was settled. She had made her point. The staff would fall in line. The investors would see that she was in control. Everything was handled. Daniel walked slowly to his locker, opened it, and began pulling out the few personal items he kept there. A photo of Lily at her school play, a thermos, a worn copy of a technical manual he had been studying. He placed them carefully in the cardboard box, his movements deliberate and calm. Lily stood up from the bench and walked over to him, her small backpack dragging on the concrete floor. She looked up at her father with worried eyes. "Daddy, are we moving again?" It was the question she always asked when things went wrong. She had learned early that instability meant packing boxes and new apartments and new schools. Daniel knelt down so he was eye level with her. He put a hand on her shoulder. "We'll be okay, sweetheart. I promise. But you always work here." "I know. Things change sometimes. But we'll figure it out." She bit her him, trying to be brave. "Are you sad?" Daniel smiled, a small, tired smile. "I'm not sad. I just remember a promise I made." She didn't fully understand, but she nodded and took his hand. They walked toward the exit together. The other mechanics watched them go. Some looked guilty, some looked away. Travis kept grinning. Margaret had already disappeared into her office. Daniel pushed open the heavy metal door that led outside to the tarmac. The afternoon sun was bright, and the air smelled of jet fuel and cut grass. He paused for a moment, standing just outside the hangar, and looked up at the squimoim. Lily tugged on his hand. "Daddy, what are you looking at?" "Just checking the weather, sweetheart." But that wasn't entirely true. Daniel was listening, waiting. Inside the hangar, the radar operator in the control tower suddenly sat up straight. His screen was showing an unscheduled aircraft entering the airport's airspace. No flight plan had been filed. No clearance had been given. He grabbed his radio. "Unidentified aircraft, this is tower control. You are entering restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately." The response came back sharp and official. "Tower control, this is Navy Seahawk 7-2. We are on official business, requesting immediate landing clearance." The operator's hand froze on the radio. Copy that, Seahawk 7-2. Cleared to land, runway 2. He turned to his supervisor. "We've got a military helicopter inbound, no advance notice." Within seconds, the word spread through the hangar. People stopped working. Mechanics stepped outside. Margaret emerged from her office, confusion written across her face. The sound came first, the deep, rhythmic thrum of rotor blades cutting through the air. Then the helicopter appeared, a massive MH-60 Seahawk painted in navy gray, descending fast and low over the runway. It was a combat search and rescue aircraft, the kind used to pull pilots out of hostile territory, the kind that didn't show up at private airports unless something serious was happening. The Seahawk touched down on the tarmac with precision, its rotors still spinning at full speed. The side door slid open, and 2 Navy personnel in flight suits jumped out. Then the loudspeaker crackled to life, the voice amplified and echoing across the entire facility. "Petty Officer Daniel Cross, report immediately." Every person in the hangar turned to look at Daniel. Margaret Hale's face went white. Daniel stood perfectly still for a moment, his daughter's hand in his. Then he knelt down again and spoke quietly to Lily. "I need you to stay with someone for a little while, okay? I have to go talk to these people." Lily's eyes were huge. "Are you in trouble?" "No, sweetheart, I'm not in trouble." One of the female mechanics, a woman named Sarah, who had always been kind to Lily, stepped forward. "I'll stay with her, Daniel." He nodded his thanks and gently transferred Lily's hand to Sarah's. Then he turned and walked calmly toward the helicopter. The entire airport watched in stunned silence. As Daniel approached, one of the Navy personnel, a lieutenant commander with a chest full of ribbons, stepped forward and saluted him sharply. Daniel returned the salute. The commander spoke, his voice carrying authority. "Petty Officer Cross, we have a situation. We need you airborne in 10 minutes. Daniel nodded once. Understood, sir? Margaret finally found her voice. She started walking towards them, her heels clicking on the concrete. Excuse me, what is going on here? This is private property. The commander turned to her with a look of cool professionalism. Ma'am, this is a United States Navy operation. I suggest you step back. Margaret stopped in her tracks, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Travis, the cocky mechanic, wasn't smirking anymore. He looked like he had swallowed his tongue. Daniel glanced back toward the hangar one last time. His eyes found Lily, standing next to Sarah. He gave her a small wave. She waved back, no longer afraid, just watching her father with something that looked like awe. Then Daniel Cross, the man they had all dismissed as just a mechanic, climbed into the Navy helicopter. The door slid shut. The rotors increased speed, and the Seahawk lifted off, rising fast into the sky. Margaret Hale stood frozen on the tarmac, watching it disappear. For the first time in her life, she realized she had made a catastrophic mistake. The hangar erupted in chaos the moment the helicopter disappeared from view. Mechanics crowded around the windows. The control tower was on the phone with the FAA, trying to understand what had just happened. Margaret Hale stood on the tarmac, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Sarah knelt down next to Lily, who was still watching the sky where her father had vanished. Your dad is pretty amazing, isn't he? Lily nodded solemnly. He doesn't like to talk about it. Talk about what, honey? The things he did before. Within an hour, the truth began to surface. One of the mechanics, a former Air Force technician named Marcus, had recognized the insignia on the helicopter and started asking questions. He made a few phone calls, he pulled up some records, and what he found left him speechless. Daniel Cross wasn't just a mechanic. He was a decorated naval aviation rescue technician who had served for 12 years in some of the most dangerous operations the Navy conducted. He had participated in over 40 rescue missions, including 3 in active combat zones. He had saved 17 lives personally, pulling pilots and air crew from crashed helicopters, sinking ships, and hostile waters. He had received the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal twice, once with a Combat V for valor. He had been part of an elite unit that specialized in high-risk technical rescues, the kind where one wrong move meant everyone died. Marcus showed the information to the other mechanics. They gathered around his phone, reading in stunned silence. Why didn't he ever say anything? One of them whispered. Because he didn't need to, Marcus replied quietly. He's not that kind of man. But there was more to the story, and it was darker. 6 years ago, Daniel had been part of a rescue operation in the Philippine Sea. A helicopter had gone down in a storm, and Daniel's team had been dispatched to pull the crew out. During the operation, Daniel had identified a critical mechanical failure in their own aircraft's rescue hoist system, the same kind of hairline fracture in the metal housing that he had recently found in the airport's hydraulic actuators. He had reported it to his commanding officer, requesting the mission be aborted until the equipment could be replaced. His CO overruled him. The mission was time critical. They had to go. During the rescue, the hoist failed. A crew chief named Robert Chen, a father of 2, fell 60 feet into storm-churned water. They recovered his body 3 days later. Daniel blamed himself. He had seen the flaw. He had warned them, and they had ignored him. The Navy cleared him of any wrongdoing. They even commended him for identifying the issue. But Daniel couldn't let it go. The nightmares wouldn't stop. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Chen falling. So he left the Navy, took his discharge, and swore he would never again let someone ignore a safety warning he gave. He became a mechanic at a civilian airport, a quiet job where he could use his skills to keep people safe without the weight of combat operations crushing him. And then Margaret Hale had dismissed his report about the hydraulic actuators. The same kind of failure, the same kind of warning ignored. History repeating itself. But this time, Daniel hadn't been able to stop it by walking away. Because while he was being fired, while Margaret was making her point to the staff, a Navy fighter squadron 300 miles away had begun experiencing exactly the kind of hydraulic failure Daniel had warned about. 3 aircraft had developed critical system malfunctions mid-flight. One pilot had barely managed an emergency landing. Another was still airborne, trying to nurse a failing aircraft back to base. The Navy had traced the parts back to the same discount supplier that Margaret's airport had used. They had issued an immediate fleet-wide grounding order, and they had realized that the only person who had documented the flaw, who understood the specific failure mode, was a former rescue technician named Daniel Cross. That's why the helicopter had come. Not to honor him, not to apologize, because lives were on the line and Daniel was the only one who could help. The commander aboard the Seahawk briefed Daniel during the flight. 2 pilots were in the air with failing hydraulic systems. They couldn't land safely, but they couldn't stay airborne much longer. Daniel needed to walk the pilots through an emergency procedure, using his knowledge of the system's mechanical tolerances to guide them into a controlled descent that wouldn't trigger a catastrophic failure. It was the kind of problem Daniel had solved 100 times in the Navy. But it had been 6 years since he'd done this work under pressure. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and let the training take over. "Get me on the radio," he said. For the next 20 minutes, Daniel talked 2 terrified pilots through a procedure that required absolute precision. He explained how to reduce hydraulic pressure in stages, how to use manual overrides, how to feel for the feedback in the controls that would tell them if the system was about to fail completely. His voice was calm, steady, confident. The first pilot landed safely. The second pilot, a young lieutenant named Ramirez, was in worse shape. His aircraft was shaking, his controls sluggish. Daniel could hear the fear in the man's voice. "Talk to me, Ramirez," Daniel said. "What do you feel in the stick?" It's heavy, it's not responding right." "That's okay, that's normal for this failure mode. You're going to reduce your speed to 140 knots. Shallow descent, 200 feet per minute. Do not touch the rudder pedals unless I tell you." "Copy, reducing speed." "Good. Now listen to me. You're going to make it. I've seen this before. You have enough hydraulic pressure left for one landing. We're going to use it. Trust your training. Trust me." "Roger that." The Seahawk circled overhead as Ramirez brought his crippled fighter in. The landing was rough, but the aircraft stayed in one piece. Ramirez climbed out of the cockpit on shaking legs and collapsed to his knees on the tarmac. He was alive. The radio crackled. The squadron commander's voice came through. "Seahawk 7-2, please convey our thanks to Petty Officer Cross. He just saved 2 of my pilots." Daniel closed his eyes and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The commander sitting across from him in the helicopter extended his hand. "You still got it, Cross." Daniel shook his hand. "I never wanted to need it again." "I know, but I'm damn glad you were there." As the Seahawk turned back toward the airport, Daniel thought about Lily, about the promise he had made to her, about the fact that he had just broken it by putting himself back in the line of fire. But he also thought about Ramirez, alive because Daniel had refused to stay silent. Sometimes keeping a promise meant breaking it. The helicopter landed back at the airport just as the sun was setting. Daniel climbed out exhausted and found Lily waiting for him with Sarah. She ran to him and hugged him tight. "Did you save someone, Daddy?" Daniel knelt down and held her close. "Yeah, sweetheart, I did." Margaret Hale was nowhere to be seen. Act 4, Community Redemption. 700 words. By the next morning, the story had spread like wildfire. Local news picked it up first. Former Navy hero working as airport mechanic saves fighter pilots. Then regional outlets. Then national news. By noon, Daniel's face was on television screens across the country, though he refused every interview request. The airport became the center of unwanted attention. Reporters camped outside the gates. The FAA launched an immediate investigation into the airport's maintenance practices and procurement procedures. Margaret Hale's decision to bury Daniel's safety report became public knowledge. The mechanics who had watched Daniel get fired now saw him in a completely different light. Marcus was the first to approach him when Daniel returned to collect the rest of his belongings. "I owe you an apology," Marcus said. "We all do." Daniel shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. We stood there and let it happen. We should have said something. Have said, you have families, you have bills, I understand." Travis, the young mechanic who had mocked Daniel, approached hesitantly. "Mr. Cross, I'm sorry. I didn't know." "You didn't need to know," Daniel said quietly. You just needed to be decent. That's all. Travis looked at the ground, shame written across his face. Margaret Hale was suspended pending the outcome of the FAA investigation. Her decision to ignore a documented safety report, to purchase substandard parts to cut costs, and to fire the one person who had tried to protect the airport's clients had destroyed her credibility. The board of directors demanded her resignation within a week. The hangar itself underwent a complete safety audit. Every part was inspected. Every system was reviewed. The discount supplier was blacklisted, and new procurement protocols were put in place. Daniel was offered his job back, with a promotion and a significant raise. He declined. Instead, he accepted a position as an independent safety consultant, working with multiple airports and aviation companies to review maintenance protocols and train mechanics on identifying critical failures. It was work he could do on his own schedule, work that let him be home for Lily every night, work that mattered. The Navy also reached out. They wanted him to return to active duty, or at least to the reserves, to train the next generation of rescue technicians. He agreed to teach, but only part-time, only when it didn't interfere with being Lily's father. The community response was overwhelming. Parents at Lily's school who had barely noticed Daniel before now stopped to thank him. The local Veterans of Foreign Wars chapter invited him to speak. A scholarship fund was established in his name for children of single parents. Daniel accepted none of the accolades gracefully. He showed up, shook hands, said thank you, and went home. Because the praise wasn't why he had done it. He had done it because it was right. Because staying silent when people's lives were at risk was something he could never do again, no matter the quantum. The mechanics at the airport, the ones who remained, began to change. They spoke up more. They questioned procedures. They stopped accepting good enough as acceptable. Marcus started a safety committee, and every week the team met to review potential issues. They called it the cross protocol, though Daniel asked them not to. It's not about me, he told them. It's about the work. But they kept the name anyway. Sarah, the mechanic who had looked after Lily, became one of Daniel's closest friends. She often invited them over for dinner, and Lily and Sarah's daughter became inseparable. Slowly, carefully, Daniel rebuilt a life that didn't require him to hide who he was. He didn't need to wear his medals or talk about his past. The people who mattered knew. The people who didn't need to. Lily watched her father navigate this new world with quiet pride. She learned from him that strength didn't require loudness, that honor didn't require recognition, and that doing the right thing was its own reward. She carried those lessons with her for the rest of her life. 6 months later, Daniel stood on the tarmac of a Navy air station, watching a Seahawk helicopter prepare for takeoff. Lily stood beside him, her hand in his, her eyes wide with wonder. The crew chief waved them over, and Daniel lifted Lily up so she could see inside the aircraft. She reached out carefully and touched the metal skin of the helicopter, feeling the vibrations of the engines. "Daddy, is this the one that came to get you?" "No, sweetheart, but it's the same kind. Did you used to fly in these?" "I used to ride in them. I wasn't a pilot. I was the person who got lowered down on a cable to help people." Lily thought about this for a moment. "Were you scared?" Daniel smiled. "Sometimes, but I had a job to do, so I did it." "Are you a hero?" He knelt down so he was eye level with her. "No, Lily, I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who tries to keep his promises. Like the promise you made to me." "Exactly like that." She hugged him tight. "I'm glad you're my dad. I'm glad you're my daughter." They watched the helicopter take off together, the rotor wash blowing their hair back. Lily allied and held on to Daniel's hand. That evening, they returned to their apartment. It was the same small, two-bedroom place they had lived in for 3 years, but it felt different now. It felt like home, not just a temporary stop. Daniel made dinner while Lily did her homework at the kitchen table. Spaghetti and meatballs, her favorite. They ate together, talking about her day at school, about a science project she was working on, about ordinary things. After dinner, Daniel tucked her into bed and read her a story, the same ritual they had followed every night since she was small. "Daddy," she said as he turned off the light. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Thank you for always coming back." His throat tightened. "I'll always come back, Lily. I promise." She smiled and closed her eyes. Daniel stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe, watching her sleep. He thought about all the times he had doubted himself, all the